Climax's relationship with the Warhammer license is quite complicated to say the least. Many of us know about their failed attempt to make a massively multiplayer Warhammer Online game many years before the other attempt that actually was released. While rumors of Warhammer Online's cancellation started in June of 2004, to get the full picture of how they were building a Warhammer game, we have to go back to the year 2000. Now, solid dates are a bit hard to come by, so you'll just have to hang on and go along with the ride. Climax had come up with 3 different proposals for an online Warhammer game. The first sounds like the Warhammer Online game we almost got. The player is a mercenary general leading an army of units on a wide variety of quests in a fully realized and fully persistent Warhammer world. The player would gain renown and reward for the participation and completion of quests. You would start the game with the most basic of armies with very little money and of course no reputation to speak of. The player would go to NPCs to receive quests, working their way up from the lowliest of NPCs up to perhaps even the king. The gold that you'd receive as a reward could be used to build up your army. What I find interesting is to get new unit types, you may have been forced to use real money to do so. This idea of using real money would translate into their second proposal. This second proposal basically took the Warhammer tabletop game and turned it into a computer game as closely as possible. Not only would you be able to customize your army, but you'd also be able to customize the landscape, building your own worlds to play in. In order to buy units though, you would have to again use real money. Nowadays, the idea of microtransactions still hurts a little bit. But think back in the year 2000, this was a brand new idea that nobody else was even considering at the time. While the world wouldn't be truly persistent like a massively multiplayer game, an online connection would be required to keep track of your armies. You'd be able to take those armies onto the servers and compete in leagues, tournaments, and crusades, and of course one-off matches. Many of these could be sponsored, offering different prizes for the eventual winner. Here we're talking about basically esports 17 years ago with the Warhammer universe. Their third proposal is one that I find to be the least interesting. The player would be a general commanding a small army and you're to take control of strongholds. You would of course command your army to take other strongholds, other people would take their armies to take your strongholds, building your rating and reputation throughout the time. It did offer jump in and jump out capabilities with a CPU player taking over as needed. These proposals weren't developed all that much, but this did show the beginning of Game Workshop and Climax's relationship with the Warhammer universe together. But following these proposals, a much more complex Warhammer Online design concept document was made. We're still in the year 2000, and things are starting to take off. This Warhammer Online game would be an online-only fantasy real-time strategy game. Again, the armies would be stored on the server online while the player isn't available. We even start to see the idea of free-to-play games taking shape here. The team hoped to offer a basic version that they would give away, featuring limited troop selection, limited access to servers in the wider community, and no financial transactions. Then you'd have the full version, which you'd gain the full access to the online world with other financial transactions. Warhammer Fantasy Battle Rules would be used as the core rule set, with enhancements to take into consideration the 3D game that they plan to make. This included true 3D line of sight and realistic fog of war, like many other real-time strategy games offered. This would make use of Climax's Halcyon engine technology. This would allow not only the huge battles that they hoped to have, but also the customization that they wanted the players to be able to have too. Now, that free version of the game could have been given away on PC-specific magazines, on store shelves they would just give it away, they could include it with Game Workshop orders, and of course the file could be hosted online. Again, I find all of this very fascinating, how they're really looking ahead to technology that didn't exist at the time. Now, for those who did want to pay for a more full version of the game, they could do that too. The game world would have its own in-game money which could be purchased online with credit cards or through retail stores, much like we see today. There could have even been different types of pay servers, ranging from a monthly charge to a pay per battle or pay per campaign model. The money could be used to buy new models, to access those pay servers, to house their army, to buy packs of personalization features, buying new shields and designs, buying the skin creation package, buying additional templates, modeling, different chat room software. They even hope to offer player-to-player transactions with a small tax. Nowadays, Steam charges 30%, we have Bethesda trying to charge for mods. Why not? While this was being developed as a PC game, They weren't ruling out the possibility of then next generation console versions of the game, including the PS2, the Xbox, and the console that was then known as the Nintendo Dolphin. But due to the persistent world that they were hoping to build, the idea of a console version was a bit far off. While predefined battlefields would be available, many battles would be generated at runtime, much how Diablo would generate its levels. As mentioned, a full suite of customization tools would be available, allowing the personalization of models, the creation of new skins, and even the conversion of models, which allows users to edit the actual shape of their models. A whole host of different servers would be available, from historical events from the Warhammer world to different campaigns that were linked together. To make things fair, they would be split up by the size of the army, from tiny 1,000 to 2,000 point armies all the way up to mighty conflicts of 10,000 plus points. Basically, they wanted you to be able to pay for whatever you wanted because money is nice. The gameplay itself would be a slow, real-time model. They don't want victories to be determined by the player's ability to move a mouse faster than somebody else, but rather because you've strategized better than the other player. Therefore, they would slow things down a bit, allowing you to select all the different armies and units that you need to. There would have even been an ability to call a timeout or think time, freezing the action so that players could plot their tactics out in advance. This ability would be limited as to not bore the other player. Your units would gain renown as they win battles. This would mostly take the form of extra bonuses for the units themselves, such as reacting better to being charged or better routing skills. As you can imagine, I find this concept to be extremely interesting just from the standpoint of it's the year 2000 and nobody else was doing it quite like this. As 2000 slowly turned into 2001, the team would continue to work on a playable demo of the game. Things seemed to be shifting a little bit from the Warhammer Online model that they talked about though, as things started to resemble a more traditional game. Warhammer Battles was still a real-time strategy game. The game would have two different campaigns, one for the Empire and one for an Orc and Goblin storyline. As the Orcs and Goblins, the player would be leading an invasion of the Empire, intent on sacking the great city of Middenheim. As the Empire, a player would be seeking to turn the tide of battle against the Orcs. Also available would be historical battles based on different scenarios. These would always be against AI opponents and are one-off games as opposed to the campaign. While the campaign would allow the player to build their army as they wanted, the historical battles would be in a set army formation. Online would still be available, but not in the persistent way that they talked about, instead offering head-to-head battles. For the story, it is the year 1555, and as the harshest winter in living memory draws to a close, the northern fringes of the Kislev are drowned by an avalanche of greenskins. Without warning, Garblag spills down from the troll country. Prague stands like a rock in a sea of goblins, and Ehrengrad is burned to the ground. With the armies of the Kislev still mainly in winter quarters, they are unable to stop the horde as they roar through Kislev and down into the Empire. And yes, that roar was in the design document. Heroes would of course play a part in the overall campaign. Some would be major characters in the campaign, while others may only show up if a player achieves certain objectives. As you've seen in the background, the team did have a basic playable demo available. There is no AI to speak of, and I'm not even sure if the head-to-head portion works properly, but you can control your armies at the most basic of levels. This demo says that it was built in June of 2001, but the team continued to work on the demo at least through November of 2001. As of November of 2001, a multi-platform release was still planned. Pre-production was set to begin in January of 2002 after a proposal had been signed with the publisher, with a planned release of Christmas of 2003. Things were continuing to change. The game planned to use a world map divided by territories that the enemies and yourself could conquer. Players could build up their leaders or heroes through battle and through quest-based challenges. Taking part in certain quests will increase your leader's status. This allowed the player to develop individual characters within their army. Using a cut-down version of the landscape editing tool used to create Warhammer battles, the player could create their own battleground. You could sculpt the landscape in real time by pulling up mountains or flattening the ground. You could choose between a choice of environmental conditions such as dry, rainy, or snow. You could position buildings, bridges, and landmark features such as rocky outcrops and forests. You could lay down rivers and streams. And that map could then be used on single-player or multiplayer online games. By the end of 2001, the team was well aware of World of Warcraft. While many on the team weren't willing to abandon the real-time strategy game yet, Others on the team began to look at the massively multiplayer genre. Still, those involved with the real-time strategy game were confident that they could grind Command & Conquer, Warcraft, and Age of Empires into the dust. By the end of 2001, not just one, not just two, but 6 campaigns were going to be in the game. One campaign for each of the playable 6 races: the Empire, Dwarves, High Elf, Orc, Skaven, and Chaos Warriors. Each campaign would be a series of pre-designed battles that the player must complete in order to win. A Cry Havoc battle mode is a one-off standalone game created by the player. Using a simple menu system, the player could create a computer-generated battle map. The player could then decide on victory conditions, the number of opponents in the battle, which races are commanded by which player, and whether players are computer or human controlled, including multiplayer. And not to be left out, you could build your own army. Armies could be built using a simple menu system, where players would get a certain amount of gold to build up their troops however they wanted. Or you could automatically generate an army for you. Or the player could play a series of battles called Total War. Players who want to fight in a campaign that is not pre-scripted and is more like an open series of battles could play the Total War game. In addition to the battle map, an old world map would be available. This is a high-level map of a region called the Old World. The region is clearly divided into territories. Each one of these territories is a battle map of the kind used to fight battles on. Territories are visually differentiated by status. These can either be friendly, territories that your army has, or enemy territories. There were even some neutral territories thrown in there where the player just hasn't been there yet. At the start of a Total War game, the player would have been able to choose a race, build an army, decide on victory conditions, and generate an old world map. At the start of each turn, each player must use the old world map to choose one of 4 actions: attack, rest, flee, or reinforce. After each turn, whichever action you choose to do, you can also spy on any territory of your choice. Now, those neutral territories aren't always going to be empty. There could be other armies there, or even monsters for you to fight. Quest items could act as power-ups and are depicted as radiant 3D objects that rotate on the landscape. Some quest items are hidden, some are contained in buildings that must be destroyed, some are granted by incidental characters, and some appear only when the player has completed a quest. For example, the player may have to kill a storm giant before the Amulet of Ronchen appears on the map. I'm sure I've pronounced that and many other things wrong. In addition to a standard battle mode, online players could play Capture the Flag, Stand Fast, where you hold your ground for a certain amount of time until reinforcements arrive, Sacred Quest, which is a race to find a Grail of Gorth, Scorched Earth, destroy more buildings than your opponents, and Down with the King, kill your enemy's commander before he kills yours, and other modes as they came up with them. Work would continue into 2002, but it seems as though the main team focus would switch to Warhammer Online, the massively multiplayer game, which would be announced in 2002. But still, this project was not forgotten. In September 2003 at the European Computer Trade Show, some described Climax as the star of the show. While they were showing Sudeki, MotoGP 2, and Warhammer Online, behind the scenes, the team was still working to secure more deals. At the very least, a reworked pitch for Warhammer Battles was pitched to EA and THQ. Based on the fact that I have more information available from THQ, I imagine that meeting went slightly better. Still, the team seemed to be using the same 2001 demo. The game was more or less the same as it had been before, with some changes to the playable races and the story. The Empire, Orcs and Goblins, Dwarves, and the Skaven were all due to be playable races in this pitch. The single-player campaign would now be based on the Dark Shadows campaign. The major powers of the Warhammer world battled one another to conquer the newly emerged and mysterious Isle of Albion. Albion is a dangerous and primitive land where hairy natives bludgeon each other with stone axes and giants hold head-butting contests in ancient stone circles. It is a mist-shrouded isle where it rains all the time and the twisted stumps of the withered trees are seldom seen through the murk. Marsh and swamplands stretch for miles, and great beasts that lurk in the bottomless muck wait to pluck the unwary from the few paths. It is a forbidding place, yet it's also a source of potentially vast riches and untapped magical power. The varied environment of Albion allows a huge variety in battlefields, so it made sense to choose the area as the main setting. One of the biggest changes would be the removal of the Fog of War system. The team wanted the game to feel a bit more like the tabletop game, where the players can see everything anyway. Stats would still be pulled from the main Warhammer game too. In the campaign, you'd be faced with a choice. Choose to side with either the Truthsayers or the Dark Emissaries. Whichever you aid most will help you with allied wizards and troops while the other side aids your enemies. The team still planned to use an army editor to allow the players to customize their troops as they saw fit, and a battlefield editor to make your own battlefields. The engine would change though, switching to the Leviathan engine. If I'm not mistaken, this engine was being used to power Warhammer Online. The powers at THQ were beginning to warm to Warhammer. That said, the pitch felt a bit lacking. They wanted to see Nottingham, who was focused on Warhammer Online, give greater input into the pitch. They wanted a real-time strategy Warhammer game by 2005, and they wanted Climax involved due to their familiarity with the IP and their relationship with Games Workshop. They wanted to see more of a design push and redevelopment of the design of the pitch. And they needed to know that Climax was capable of following through with whatever they agreed to, seeking a long-term commitment with THQ. Not long thereafter, Warhammer Online collapsed. Gamers would get a Warhammer game on the PSP, and a different game on Windows and Xbox 360. I feel like though it wasn't until 2015 with Total War Warhammer where some of the ideas built for Warhammer battles finally came to. It's a shame that Climax wasn't able to make things happen with either this or Warhammer Online, because I do feel as though they were ahead of the time. With Warhammer seemingly bigger than ever, and with Total War Warhammer 2 on its way, I think we'll be seeing much more of Warhammer in the future. Until next time, thanks for watching.